Hi, in this video we're going to look at how to use PHP with a MySQL database and use select queries. So one of the first functions that we're going to use is the MySQL query function. And basically we give it the database connection information along with an SQL query so that it can connect to your MySQL database. And it will return either true if it was able to connect and execute the query, or false if it couldn't connect or it couldn't execute the query for some reason. Some other functions that we'll use in this includes the MySQL num rows, and that will tell us how many rows are affected, and the MySQL fetch array. So when we make a request to the database to select something and it's going to return a value, it's going to return it to us in the form of an array. And then we can loop through that array. So, as I said, we get one row of data back at a time in the format from an array. And most of the time, if you have more than one result coming back, then you'll loop through it. And we can also add an additional parameter to specify what type of an array is returned. And we'll look at an associative and an indexed example. So as I said, one of the most common things that you do in your SQL database is to select information from a table. So we're going to start with just working with a single table to make a request for information and then get that back on our screen. So to select data in PHP, you first need to connect to the database. We need to create a safe query, and we do that by using the right side of an assignment. So we'll look at an example of that, but basically we create a variable and set it equal to our SQL query. Then we run the query and then we read in the results. So fire up your editor and create a new file called showcontacts.php. And here we've broken it out to the different steps. So we make the connection to the database. And there's a previous video on connecting to the database, so you'll want to watch that on how to create your dbinfo PHP script. That script contains the connection to the database. Then we create our safe query. So on the left we have a variable. I just called it query. You can call it whatever works for you. I'm setting that equal to, and then you'll notice in here we have a string that contains our SQL statement, our SQL command. So select everything from contacts, and we're going to put it in alphabetical order by last name. Then we use the MySQL query function to execute and run the query. So it gets the connection information from our dbinfo script, and then we use the query in here for what we want it to execute. So this will make the connection to the database, execute the query, and then take the result of what was executed and store it in result. If there's a problem and it's unable to make the connection and execute the query, then this would be false. And then it comes down here and runs the else part to say there was a problem with the query. So if it is successful, then we're going to find out how many things are in result and put that into count, and then just display that out as an echo statement so we know how many results we had. Then we're going to loop through. So we're creating a variable called row, and that's equal to the MySQL fetch array result, and we'll use the MySQL associative value in here. So then we can use, here we're just going to echo or print out the value from the ID field, the first name field, the last name field. So where this information is coming from, let me just pull up a little shot here of the information that is in your table in your MySQL database. Right? These are our field names, and so in here we're using our field names. So when you execute this, this is a screenshot of what it's going to look like. It's not very pretty, it's not formatted. We are just getting and looking at the output from the database. And as we saw in the last example, we used the associative parameter, and we can also use the indexed parameter. So what does that look like? If you were to change up your show contacts PHP script and change it to MySQLi num, then we can just use the numerical values for each field, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll get the same output, but this, again, this is the table in the database, so it starts counting at 0, so ID is 0 and email is 1 and first is 2. So sometimes you might want to use the numerical value. To me, I think it makes more sense to go the other way and have the field names in here, but it's good to know, if you were to see examples written this way, that we could go with just the numerical values, or we could use the associative array and get the names of the fields. So as we said, our output really isn't all that pretty. We have raw data here, and so now we'll look at an example of how to format this out to look a little nicer. So we're going to turn our text that looks this way into something like this, and we're going to add delete and edit buttons. So in future videos we'll be able to code this so that if we wanted to delete this record, we could do it from here, and then if we want to edit this record, we can do it right from here. So let's set that up in this script. So we're still in the show contacts PHP script, and we're going to add on a little bit right in here, right after we echo the number of contacts. And the part that we're going to add in is this print here statement. So we're just printing out a little heading, and then select a record to edit or delete, and we're going to have a link to another page where we'll eventually be able to edit it. And then we're going to open up a table tag. And what that will we're starting to format here is this part right here, where we have my contacts, right? Here's the heading for my contacts, select a record to edit or delete, add new contacts. So this part is this print here. Next, we're going to add another print here that will add in the buttons and format this output. So still in the show contacts page. So we have this big print here statement, and this is the rest of the table. So it's inside the while loop. So while it's getting this information from our result, we are formatting the output of our table, and our buttons are inside forms, so we have form tags, and we're setting this up for future scripts so that when we want, if we're hitting the delete button, we're going to send it to a confirm delete script that is going to ask, are you sure you want to do that? And so we'll do that in another video. But you can also see here that we have a hidden form field. So the user doesn't see this on the screen, but when they click this button, it's going to pass a value called SEL record, which is kind of short for selected record, and then the value, which is the ID of that particular record. And then we also have the delete button or the submit button, which says delete on it. The second button, also a separate form tag, because they're only going to be able to pick either one or the other, so they're not going to be able to interact with both at the same time. So the second form button is to update. So when we want to make changes to an existing record, we'll be able to pass this information to an update form script. And you can see again here we have a hidden form field for select record, and we're going to pass the ID for that one. So if it's delete, we're going to pass the ID to a delete script, and if it's for update, we're going to pass the ID to an update script. So right now, don't worry too much about these other than knowing that we're using a hidden form field to pass the ID to another script that we'll be editing in a later video. And the rest of this is another part of the table, and I just use tables to keep it simple for layout. So in here we're printing out the first name and the last name and the phone number and the email address so that they'll display. And then down here we're closing out the table row and the table and body and HTML tag. So once you have this in, and you run and test it, then a sample output page would look something like this, where we have the number of contacts, the total number that you have in here, and then each record displaying with its own delete and edit buttons. So this would be the first part of what is called a SCRUD database. A SCRUD database is to search, create, read, update, and delete. So this script would be for reading, right? We're reading the information in from an existing database to be able to see it on screen.